I'd like to start by thanking Mayor Lightfoot for joining us here at Police Headquarters today to discuss our plans for 2022. Before I begin, though, I want to also take a moment to acknowledge all of those who have been victims of violence and the residents who have lost someone to violence. They are why we are here. We just met with our command staff to discuss our public safety goals. Moving forward for 2022, all of our efforts, all of them, are centered around making sure the people of Chicago feel safe and are safe. Our goals are guided by visibility, engagement, and collaboration. I'm going to repeat that. Our goals are guided by visibility, engagement, and collaboration. We are building on the foundation we have already set to be more present and visible and engaging in our communities. This does not mean just showing up when something bad happens. It means being present in our neighborhoods by being there when good is happening too. It is getting out of the squad cars, getting from behind the desk, and listening to neighbors, having a clear and open dialogue. Yes, it's about building trust. Focusing on 2022, the Chicago Police Department would expand our whole of government public safety approach, health care approach to public safety. What I mean by this is that we will be working side by side with our city and community partners to include wraparound services, affordable housing, quality mental health care, and drug treatment services. Collaboration is key to our public efforts. We need more support from state and federal legislators in fighting gun trafficking, holding offenders accountable, and keeping them off of our streets, out of our neighborhoods, especially as we maintain a precision focus on taking down gang and narcotic criminal networks that drive violence in our city and expanding our carjacking efforts. Chicago Police Department strategies for 2022 will build upon successful efforts across the board. This year, we are increasing our homicide investigators and our technology across the city, investing in officer wellness and growing community trust. To improve our clearance rates, we will increase the number of our homicide detectives by 200. We've already got 100 newly promoted detectives in detective school. We plan on promoting another 100 to get our detective ranks up to 1,300 for the department, to reduce our caseloads and improve our clearance rates. In addition, we'll be expanding our pod video cameras and our license plate reader technology in a comprehensive plan for ingress, egress from freeways and in all of our neighborhoods to include our retail corridors. We closed out the year of 2021 recovering more than 12,000 firearms. Every firearm recovered is a potential deadly force encounter by our police officers. And every gun recovered is a life saved. And staying on task means keeping our officers at their best. That's why our officer wellness is a priority. We expanded the number of clinicians and will be adding 2 new off-site locations for police officers to receive services for their wellness. And there will be a clinician assigned to all of our 22 police districts. I want to reiterate that the Chicago Police Department is dedicated to growing community trust and improving those vital relationships in our community. We expanded the neighborhood policing initiative to 10 districts and currently have 150 of those district coordinating officers for our MPI program. The department last year, in 2021, had more than 500,000 positive community interactions. That's last year. This year, our goal is to have at least 1.5 million positive interactions that are engaging with the community, building trust, getting out of the squad car, getting from behind the desk, and building trust. Our recruitment efforts will also play into this. We had more than 7,200 applications to be a Chicago police officers last year. We are processing those applications to fill our vacancies, but we want to double that number of applications for 2022 to 14,000 applications for the Chicago Police Department. Community policing is about having more officers visible and accessible on the ground in our neighborhoods, getting out of your cars. Did I mention building trust? We are striving for a safer Chicago and a more transparent Chicago Police Department, a transformed department with a changed culture. CPD achieved the highest increase in consent decree compliance during our most recent monitoring period compared to previous monitoring periods. We will continue to change the culture of the Chicago Police Department through reform with even greater compliance with our consent decree. A whole-of-government approach to public safety that includes public health is essential to the future of Chicago. True change and comprehensive reform requires real efforts, and that's what the Chicago Police Department is doing. So with that, I want to thank our Chicago police officers for getting up every day, every shift, and serving the city of Chicago every day. It's no small task, no small sacrifice, but the men and women of the Chicago Police Department work around the clock to make our neighborhoods safer. It is the most challenging, difficult, and dangerous time to be a police officer in our country. With that, it's my honor to introduce the mayor of the city of Chicago, Mayor Lori Lightfoot, to speak on our efforts and the work ahead. Mayor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year to those that I haven't seen yet. Let me just say this. Since day one of my administration, especially the year after the year that we've just endured, public safety remains not just one of many priorities, but my first and primary priority. 2021 was an incredibly tough year. It ended with far too many of our residents feeling like they could personally be the victim of a crime. Homicides and shooting at a place that no one, including me, wanted to see. When we think about the rise in violent crimes and homicides across our country, we still fell short. That context is little comfort to people who are fearing for their own safety in block after block, neighborhood after neighborhood, and we all know that. The message that we brought to the men and women who are responsible for our safety every single day is accountability. We must do more. Our residents have a right to expect that they are going to be safe in their home, in their car, while they're at work, while they're shopping, while they're living their daily lives. And we have to hold ourselves accountable to a higher standard and making sure that that happens. The superintendent has run through a number of things that the police department itself will be doing, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Every single day, I push myself and everyone around me to step up and do more. And the message that I brought to the police department leadership is that if you don't go to bed every night, and if you don't wake up every morning thinking about what you can individually do more to make our city safer, you're in a wrong job. Our police officers are truly heroic. That's not just a pleasant notion. It is the fact. They work their tails off every day, every shift to bring safety to our city. But as leaders, we have to recognize we are nowhere near where we need to be. We are nowhere near where our residents want us to be, and we have to step up and do more. So I carry the conversations, and usually they're in tears, with the victims of crime. I carry their voices, their comments, their trauma with me every single day. And what I said to the command staff is we cannot live in a world where residents of neighborhoods feel like the gangs and the violent, dangerous people have control, where those residents fear the gangs, and that they think that we have lost control. And unfortunately, that is sadly true in too many neighborhoods. One neighborhood alone where that is the prevailing sentiment is one too many. And we have to recognize that that is a reality and step up and challenge ourselves to do more. And we will do more. The superintendent talked about some of the things that we're going to be doing to add resources to the department to make sure that we take back the street from the violent, dangerous people who are our common enemy, and we must execute on these plans with fidelity. So first, as I said, there's no doubt that our common enemy are the illegal guns and the violent, dangerous people who use them without any regard for the sanctity of lives, the precious lives of our children, our youth, our elders, and other innocents. Our city is simply awash in illegal guns, and unfortunately has been for years. And the resulting harm is showing up on our streets, in our emergency rooms, in our morgue, our funeral homes, every single day. Illegal guns are threatening not only our residents, but our police officers as well. In 2021 alone, 76 police officers were shot at or shot. And for the sake of the lives of our residents, as well as the lives of our police officers and their families who depend upon them every single day, we have to do more to take the heart out of the illegal gun trafficking that is putting illegal guns into the hands of dangerous people who don't care about who they kill, harm, or maim. We have to end this. So to address this issue in 2022, CPD will continue utilizing dedicated gun teams to seize guns and find and cut off their sources and supplies. Just got an update on many of these cases, and there's a lot of good work that's in progress, I can assure you. We also have to lean in to our partnership with the ATF and other federal agencies, state, county, and local law enforcement, and federal prosecutors. Second, we must behind those illegal guns are often gang members who are walking the street and wreaking havoc in our neighborhoods. Not only are gangs a major source of violence in our communities, but they continue to prey upon our most vulnerable residents. You've heard me say this before, but in too many neighborhoods, gangs are targeting young boys with promise, young boys with a whole history and opportunity in front of them, but they're targeting with false promises of wealth, an easy life, and a sense of purpose and belonging. We've got to disrupt those efforts to recruit our young boys into gangs that we know ends in a life of misery, either jail or death. They're exploiting the vulnerable who are addicted to drugs, with increasingly lethal drugs laced with cutting agents like fentanyl. We've got to support those individuals and make sure that we provide sufficient addiction recovery resources all across our city so we cut off the market for the illegal drugs. This has to happen. That's why this year we planned continuing striking hard blows against gangs in our city by seizing more drugs, seizing more currency, related to narcotics trafficking off of our streets. And I've got to commend the men and women who are responsible for this work. Last year, the police department set a record in the amount of illegal guns and the amount of currency that was seized as a result of gun trafficking and narcotics activity in our city. But I've challenged each of them, as the superintendent has, to do that much more. We've got to continue getting after these gangs and the source of their wealth, and we will continue to do that, starting with my press to the City Council to debate and then pass the Victims' Justice Ordinance, which will seize gang members' cash and assets. We have to expand the number of officers committed to investigating gangs and dramatically increase the number of homicide detectives, which the superintendent has committed to, and we will do. We need to expose holding hardened criminals accountable to deter other crimes before they happen. And you've heard me say this before, but we have way too many violent, dangerous individuals on our street. When I think about our officers going out every single day, every watch, risking life and limb to bring dangerous people to justice, and then to see them return to the same neighborhoods where they cause horrible, untold harm, to see them back on the streets within 24 and 48 hours is not only a slap in the face to our officers and the lives that they risk every single day to bring these individuals to justice, it's a slap in the face to victims. I want the people who think it's a good idea to have 2,300 violent, dangerous people out on our streets right now as we speak. People charged with murder, attempted murder, kidnapping, carjacking, rape, and other crimes of violence. If you think that that looks like criminal justice reform, then I want to talk to you, because frankly, it isn't. It is saying to the victims of crime, the survivors and the witnesses, that there is no justice in the criminal justice system for you. So yes, we're going to keep pressing this issue because it is a challenge that we must succeed. We've got to hold violent, dangerous people accountable, and no time like the present to start. It makes no sense to keep returning these people over and over again. Last year alone, the Chicago Police Department arrested 133 individuals, many times with ankle bracelets on their ankles, who committed another murder, another shooting, another crime of violence. When is the criminal justice system in this county going to wake up? Well, I hope that you will all join me in talking to not only the courts, not only Chief Judge Evans, the presiding judge of the criminal courts, but also Cook County commissioners, in saying enough is enough. We've got to do more to hold these people accountable. And if they're back out on the streets after committing horrible crimes of violence, we are sending a message to them that they are free to go about their business and do it again and again and again. And that cannot be what we repeat over and over again in the year 2022. But we also know that aside from doing these things in the immediate term to make sure that our residents are safe, we've also got to make the long-term investments so that we create opportunity and hope in too many communities where desperation is the prevailing sentiment. I said this before. Over the course of a lot of time, going back at least to the 70s, we've seen these huge spikes in violence and then a trough. A huge spike in violence and then a trough. And what have we done almost every single time? We've thrown massive amounts of law enforcement, policing resources at the problem. Now, law enforcement is absolutely important. No one is going to question that. But if we want to rid our city of this recurring cycle of violence once and for all, we've got to look at the root causes of the violence and make the investments there. That's why we pushed the City Council to pass a budget that includes $1.2 billion in investments in 2022, the vast majority of which are gone to quality of life issues, like affordable housing, like mental health care, like reaching out and providing supports to our young people and their families. If we make those investments in our people and places at the earliest point in a child's life, we are going to break the cycle that we see of violence once and for all. And I am determined to do that. It can't just be on the backs of law enforcement alone. We all have to step up in a whole of city approach, not just city government, but I'm calling upon members of the faith community, members of community-based organizations, philanthropy, businesses, stepping up and thinking about what more can I do to make a difference in the quality of life of my community. If we make those long-term investments and we follow that plan with fidelity, we will build the foundation and a bridge to a peaceful Chicago that has eluded us for the last 50-plus years. That is a long time to think about accepting a level of violence that we have grown to accept that is absolutely unacceptable in this day and age. But without making those long-term investments, we're going to be tilting at windmills. We will never get it done. And we've got the tools and the resources now with the federal dollars that we have received, with other monies that we put together to make that long-term investment, build those corridors of opportunity in neighborhoods that have been plagued by violence for way too long. We've got to make that commitment to ourselves. It's not just an investment in places like Austin and Inglewood or Pullman or Roseland. It's an investment in the entire part of our city. You know this. People all of our city feel afraid. And we've got to acknowledge that fear. But we've got to fight that by fighting our common enemies, which are gangs and guns, to be sure, and striking hard blows against them. But another common enemy that we cannot forget is poverty and all of the terrible consequences of not investing in people and places. The chickens came home to roost over these last 20-plus months. We see this not just through COVID, but during this time where we can't hide from our history and the reality of disinvestment in this city. So the long-term play has to be building that foundation of investments in our neighborhoods everywhere so that we fight the crime and we fight the pipeline and the lure of the streets. I know this from my experience as a former federal prosecutor, from my experience as a defense attorney, but also my experience as a sister and a daughter of people who have been involved in the criminal world. The lure of the streets is real. It can be every bit as potent as a narcotic. But if we give our children and our young people a vision of their life that is different, if we show them opportunity and so that they can touch and feel it every single day, they're going to know that there's a better, different path ahead for them. And that's what we've got to keep focused on. Public safety is our priority. But we've got to play the short and the long game. The short game is making sure that we hold accountable violent, dangerous people who are wreaking havoc in our neighborhoods, but the long-term play is making those critical investments in the things that we know build healthy and strong communities. And I'm inviting members of the public, the business community, the philanthropic community, the faith community, people who just care about their neighborhoods to join us on this journey. And with that, we'll take your questions.
We're at compared to the previous year.
That's right.
Now, all the numbers, the positive numbers.
Well, I think if you listen to what the superintendent and I just said, we have articulated a different set of priorities and initiatives for this year, and I'll let the superintendent talk specifics, but we're adding more detectives. We're leaning into the gun teams and narcotic teams and doing more there. We're challenging our federal partners to work with us, not only to be engaged in more investigations, but take on more prosecutions. I sent a letter to the Department of Justice, to Attorney General Merrick Garland, right before the holiday break, asking him and imploring him to send federal agents on a deployment for 6 months, both ATF and marshals and more prosecutors, because we need additional federal support. It's not enough just to say we're going to be focused on this issue. The fact of the matter is we need federal resources, particularly when it comes to gun trafficking. The federal government is uniquely qualified to address these issues. They know that, I know that, and I'm going to continue pressing the Department of Justice to send more resources, not just to Chicago, but other cities that are also suffering from the surge in violence occasioned by illegal guns on our streets. It makes no sense that every single year the Chicago Police Department takes more illegal crime guns off the street than New York or LA combined. That's because of gun trafficking. That's because of federally licensed gun dealers selling to straw purchasers. And the only way we can fight that is with federal resources organized on gun trafficking across jurisdictions to trace and track those guns where they're coming from and send a very clear message to the federally licensed firearms dealers that if you're going to traffic in illegal guns that are ending up in streets in Chicago, New York, and wherever else, that we are coming for you and we're going to prosecute you. And I think I've demonstrated we're not going to hesitate to also take civil action. We sued a gun dealer over in Indiana earlier this year, and we're looking for other targets that we can bring to justice through the civil courts, if not the criminal courts. But we've got to work coherently together and making sure that we're pushing ourselves, but also pushing our partners, particularly at the federal level, to step up and do more to help cities like Chicago. Superintendent, I don't know if you want to address.
Another question for the mayor after that? Okay, great. So you're just going to ask all the questions today with all these reporters in the room. So I'm good with that if they're okay. But let me just say this, though, to who I think is one of the most important people here is the media telling the story about what we're saying here. These are more than numbers. I mean, we get into the habit of talking about the weekends and the years in numbers. These are people and families. These are neighborhoods. These are communities that I would just encourage you as the fourth branch of government to really start telling stories about people who are being affected by violence. That's number one. Number two, I think specifically to your questions, we recounted several things we're doing different and or expanding on. I think it's not lost, it's not a small thing to have the case per detective go from 5 to 3 in our homicide unit. That's significant. That's the gold standard for homicide investigations. That gets you to a much higher clearance rate. That's no small thing. That's number one. Number two, the best and really most important metric that we're really emphasizing is engaging the public to build trust. That's the linchpin to solving all crimes, perceptions of crime, perceptions of safety, and actual safety. We need the community. And the fact that we had 500,000 positive engagements with the community, and our goal for 2022 is 1.5 million, is significant. And if we need to raise that goal to 2 million or more, we will. We won't stop doing the things that we need to do as a police department in our role. We're not the whole problem. We're not the whole solution. We can't do it alone, but there are some things we have to do. And engaging the public is number one. And lastly, we have these conversations about what we can do, what others can do, and what the government has done. Another aspect of what we're talking about is the criminal offender. We never talk to them directly. I just want to say a few words. You think we're just going to let you get away with killing people? You think you're just going to carjack people in this city and get away with it? Smash and grab our retail, these small businesses who work hard for the products on their shelves? You think you're just going to get away with that? We're coming after you. We're going to hold you accountable, and we want to keep you in jail. Habitual, repeat offenders need to stay in jail once we capture you. But we're not just going to let you get away with this. It's not over. You may think it's over. It's not over. Our investigators are relentless in pursuing you. We have cases coming forward on both carjacking, organized retail theft, and homicides, but we are going to bring you to justice. You didn't get away with anything. We are going to be relentless, and we're not going to let you ruin this city. We're not. When I say we, I'm saying all of Chicago, including this police department, all the faith leaders, all the stakeholders, all the business people, all the block clubs, all of the beat meetings that we have. We are not going to let you do this to this city and not be held accountable, period. So again, as the fourth branch of government, like Thomas Jefferson said, I'd rather have the free press without government than government and no free press. You have a role to play in telling these stories differently than you had by just recounting numbers. These are lives. These are people who are forever affected by their loss. Tell the stories of these families and likely prick the hearts of judges to set no bail or high bails so that they won't get out of jail. As long as this is just a number, no one's really empathetic. Tell the stories of these families. Prick the hearts of these judges so that they can't not, with a clear conscience, let these people back into these neighborhoods at these bail hearings. Thank you.
Superintendent, on the streets every day, telling the stories of these families, and you highlighted trust, the mayor highlighted investment. However, many members of the community still feel that they don't really see the investment in their communities. They feel there's lack of police presence, amongst other things. So how do we know that those resources will eventually be assigned to the communities that mostly need them?
We're dedicated. We're committed. I think one of the things that best answers your question, 76 officers were shot at or shot. Ella French was murdered. She was murdered in August. In August, we had taken 8,000 guns off the streets. You would think after one of your beloved officers is killed, that officers would just quit and say, man, that's too dangerous. I want to go home to my family. After Ella French was murdered, our officers took another 4,000 guns off the streets of Chicago. That's how we're going to convince people we're dedicated and committed and earn their trust and change their perceptions of safety. That's how we're going to show Chicago that this department they can be proud of. They can be proud of it because we'll risk everything for you. Everything. You had a question for the mayor?
Yes.
All right. And others have questions, brother. I'm sorry.
Mayor.
Hi, Cheryl.
Support bail reform, also speak very passionately about what should happen as well. I was just wondering if, when you talk about bail reform, and it's all across the country, aren't people really focusing on the folks who languished in jail just because they can't afford it? And doesn't bail reform, as it's being proposed across the country, say, keep the dangerous criminals in jail?
So let me say a couple things about that. I don't think it's bail reform to let violent, dangerous people out on the street. That's not what bail reform is about. Nobody here believes that because you're poor or because you're working class, that we ought to turn Cook County Jail into a debtor's prison. We know the stories of what that leads to. That's catastrophe on an individual basis. That hurts families. That's not what we're talking about. And I don't think the notion of bail reform is consistent with what we're saying, which is, I'm sorry, murderers, rapists, people who are carjacking with guns should not be out on the street. Let's go back to kind of first principles. When we think about electronic monitoring, right? Electronic monitoring was a program designed to free up from the jails people who were nonviolent, who were going to get support by supervision in the community. That's not what's happening in Cook County. We're just dumping people out on the streets without any kind of community supports or supervision in the neighborhoods. If you do look at what the pre-COVID numbers were for the EM program, and you compare it with now, I think the superintendent has used the word explosion, and that's correct. We had about 1,200 people that were on EM pre-COVID. We've got 3,300 now. The vast majority of them, over 2/3, are dangerous, violent criminals. I'm talking about what the lead charge is: murder, attempted murder, aggravated battery with a firearm, felons in possession, kidnappers. I mean, the list goes on and on. It is mind-blowing when you think about what has happened under the moniker of criminal justice reform. That is not criminal justice reform. What that is making our streets more dangerous. I absolutely fundamentally support the notion that we are not going to lock up poor people. We're not going to lock up people who simply can't afford to pay bail. That doesn't make any sense. That destabilizes individuals, their families, it destroys lives. But yeah, I absolutely 1,000% sign up for murderers should be locked up. And yet, I think we've got 90 murderers that are out on electronic monitoring. I mean, it's insane. Let me share some numbers with you, and this is from this is from the Sheriff's Department's EM list. 90 people charged with murder that are out on EM, 40 people charged with attempted murder, 852 people charged with aggregated gun possession, 518 people charged with being a felon in possession, 191 people charged with aggravated battery, 175 people charged with a sex crime, 171 people charged with robbery. 50 people charged with armed violence, 23 people charged with vehicular hijacking, 7 people charged with kidnapping, 15 people charged with aggravated kidnapping. You tell me sitting there, do you feel safer knowing these numbers? I don't think any sane person does. And what we're saying is, yes, we support criminal justice reform. Yes, we support not locking up poor people and turning Cook County Jail into a debtor's prison. But nobody that I know of, and certainly on this side of the podium, thinks it's a good idea for our officers to be out there on every watch, risking life and limb, and letting these violent, dangerous people be right back into the communities from which they were arrested and creating havoc. And you know what we hear from the victims? What we hear is, doesn't anybody care about us? Doesn't anybody care about the fact that we don't feel safe when we see the person who just shot up our neighborhood, who I mustered the courage to go to the police and identify, and then they're right back on the street walking biggest day as if there is zero accountability? That's what's contributing to the level of brazenness that we're seeing on our street. Now, I am willing to work with our county partners. I've made a commitment to do that. I've made a commitment to bring city resources to all of these people, including juvenile offenders, so that there is a sticky handoff from the jail back into the community, because a lot of these young men, they want to come home from the streets. And we can, if we work together, to provide them with support in the community. But to turn a blind eye to what's going on in the criminal courts and act as if this is okay, we will never drive down our violent crime numbers if the judges don't wake up and recognize the harm that they are doing every single time that they let one of these violent criminals back out on the street, which is precisely why I called for a moratorium. And people say, oh, that's unconstitutional. I beg to differ. This lawyer looked at the state statute, and this lawyer knows that one of the elements that judges are supposed to consider in making a bail decision is community safety. What is going to be the impact on the community of this person going back and being out on EM? And when you're basically putting people back out on the street with no community supervision, which is a critical component of the electronic monitoring system, you are doing no one a favor except the criminals. Yeah.
So a lot of the things that you are proposing, both long-term and short-term, the long-term is going to take a while for anybody to see any kind of big crime. People are concerned, as you all point out, about what's happening right now. How confident are you that these short-term measures are going to make any kind of significant dent, like a right-of-way?
Well, my hope is that they will, and we're going to keep pressing to make sure that they do that. I started off my comments to the command staff today talking about accountability. No one can be comfortable with the way that we ended the year, with the number of homicides that we had, more than New York or LA, two cities that have multiples in size of our population. Now, they all had an increase, but our number is staggering compared to that. So that's the benchmark that we have to fight against. Not what we did in 21 or 20. We got to get back to what we did in 2019. And that means that there's got to be a lot more accountability. We brought that message loud and clear to the district commanders, to the deputy chiefs and the chiefs. You're looking at the senior leadership of this department. They each understand that they have a role to play, that they've got to lead by example. They've got to challenge the members of the department to step up and do more. And we're going to hold people accountable. I'm holding myself accountable. I'm holding my senior leadership team in the mayor's office accountable. We all are accountable to the residents of the city to do a better job in bringing down the violence that is terrorizing our city. And let me just step back and say this. 2021, there was a lot of great things that happened in Chicago. We had the lowest unemployment rate. We've had the largest amount of what we call pro-Chicago decisions made by businesses that could be anywhere in the world relocating to Chicago in the middle of a pandemic, or businesses that are here expanding it, 172 by year's end. More venture capital money than we've seen ever, over $7 billion. The list goes on and on of accomplishments. But all of that pales when we have this stigma of being a violent city. Everybody has to understand that. People all over the city are working their tails off to create a better life for themselves, for their families, for their employees. All of that will be for naught if we do not get the violence down. So I want everybody who is listening, I want everybody to know every single day that is my number one mission. And that is the superintendent's number one mission, and the senior leadership that is here. Those positive community interactions led by now Chief Nieves, congratulations, sir. Why is that important? Navales, I'm sorry. Why is that important? It's important because we don't solve crimes if the people don't trust the police. Right. Every single homicide that's been solved is a result of great detective work, use of technology, but the secret sauce is people believing in the department. People believing that if they put their lives on the line by coming forward, that information is going to be used for good and lead to the solving of a crime, whether it's a homicide, whether it's a break-in, whether it's a rape or something else serious. But we can't get there unless we're positively interacting with the police. The police have to show up, not just when there's an emergency with lights blaring and sirens going. They've got to show up every single day and build that trust, one person at a time. These folks get that. And the challenge that the superintendent has issued to the department, do 1 million more than what you did last year, that's a good challenge. And frankly, it could be a little higher. But I'll start with 1 million more positive interactions with the community, because that's going to pay dividends in the long run.
Mayor, happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.
You talked about residents not just feeling safe, but actually being safe.
Yes.
With the initiatives, plans that you outlined with the superintendent, will Chicago residents actually be safer this year in 2022?
Well, like as the saying goes, the proof is in the pudding. But absolutely, that is our objective. That's our goal. And you're going to hold us accountable. Every single day, residents can go on dashboards at CPD and check and see on a block-by-block, neighborhood-by-neighborhood basis, what are the current trends. And we have to hold ourselves accountable. We're being very transparent about what's happening on a neighborhood-by-neighborhood basis. So we're going to hold ourselves accountable. We're going to look and pivot and adjust if we need to. But we're going to drive and lean into the strategies that we know are going to make a difference in the quality of residents' life. As I said, it is the priority. On a day-to-day basis, there's lots of things that are on my plate, no question about it. But this is the priority. And our officers know, our community-based organizations know, our street intervention folks, they all know this year is make or break. We've got to do a better job than what we did in 2021. No questions about it, no excuses. It's about accountability. It's making sure that our residents are safe.
Thank you, Mayor. And for you, Superintendent, what role will community-based organizations play in developing, working with at-risk individuals who are participating in these types of doing these crimes, and supporting that building of trust in neighborhoods?
Right, I'm a big advocate of violence interrupter street outreach. We work with them. I personally have scheduled calls with them. We need to figure out whatever the funding mechanism in the nonprofits for scaling their capacity. You know, the city government has done their part in the commitments of real dollars to this effort. We need our philanthropists in this city, and we have many, to step forward and help these nonprofits with more and more funding toward salaries for capacity for street outreach. They make a real difference, but they just don't have the capacity to be in all the neighborhoods and communities they need to be in on a round-the-clock basis. These are interactions they need to have at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes turn right back around and have those same interactions at 2 p.m. in the afternoon. So it is a 24-hour cycle of the work that street outreach needs to do. I support this. This is the way forward in effect. You won't be able to rush your way out of it. You have to change some hearts and minds. You have to influence some young people to make different decisions. That's likely not a law enforcement role. You know, we got these handcuffs we're going to put on you to change your behavior, but likely it won't change your heart or your mind, right? We need that type of influence, and that can come from the street outreach platform where people who likely were in that life at one point came out of it and now are committed to giving back to the community. That's the scale and capacity we need. Not all of the solutions will come from government. They won't. Everyday people that have an opportunity to have a real job in street outreach with a salary that pays your bills and is committed to the community, that makes a real difference in the lives of young people making different decisions. So yes, that's the path that I really want to continue to encourage. Any of the philanthropists in the city with deep pockets want to make good on giving back the great American dream that you've had in this city and want the city to be better, do better, be safer. This is a great commitment to your dollars. Street outreach. I would encourage you to consider that as a real investment in Chicago.
You know, before I take your question, can I just follow up on the point that Evelyn made? As you were asking the question, the superintendent was talking, it reminded me of one of my last cases when I was a AUSA. I was prosecuting a very violent crew that made its money by robbing stash houses. And these individuals were sick humans who tortured the people that were guarding these stash houses. And one of the individuals that was part of the crew, it was a team of FBI agents and CPD that recruited one of the people in the crew to turn his life around. Now, I will tell you that they told me about this case, and I said, all right, so where's the confession? And they're like, well, he said he wanted to think about it more and then come in. And I said, that guy's never coming in. Well, he did. And his name is Danny Perez. And I remember him now because as I sat down to debrief him, this kid who was 21 years old at the time, it was very clear that he had not had any positive adult interaction in his life. And I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional about it. There are so many of our young men that are out in the street, that are doing terrible things, that need an off-ramp, that need somebody to reach out to them and show them a different way of life. And this young man had spent his life in fear of these individuals, but couldn't figure out how to break the cycle. And the way he broke the cycle was by confessing a multi-page, I think it was like 10 or 12-page handwritten confession, because he wanted desperately to be out of the life. I dare say there are probably tens of thousands of young men that are out there right now doing things that they know they shouldn't be doing, engaged in a life that they want out of. We've got to give them a way home from the streets. So part of the investment in the short term, but also the long term, is making sure that they understand that if they want to turn their lives around, that there's a way to do it. Street outreach certainly is one of the most, I think, successful ways that we can intervene, but also providing those community-based organizations that are in the streets every day doing incredibly hard and difficult work. We need to make sure that they're also fully funded and supported. So we see more Danny Perez's coming home from the streets. That's what I would love to see. I think about that young man almost every single day and wonder what's happened. He got a 15-year sentence because of his cooperation, gave up several murders, put these guys to federal prison for the rest of their lives, which is where they deserve. But he did that at great risk to himself because he wanted a way to come home. He wanted a different life. And we've got to keep that door open for those young men and women that want to come home from the streets. Go ahead.
Mayor, you talked about the work that CPD officers do on the streets every day.
Mm-hmm.
In the last 2, 3, 4 years, there's been an eye on the foot chase policy, in particular
Mm-hmm.
chase policy, for narrowing that policy.
Mm-hmm.
Any appetite or push to revisit in an opposite direction either of those policies or changing any meaningful policy?
Well, I wouldn't say narrow the policy. I think more to the point is clarify the policy and having a policy that, A, is very clear, that officers understand, making sure that their voice is in the policies as they've evolved, and making sure that we're doing the training that's necessary for them to understand what the new rules are. And I'll talk about foot pursuit, and I'll invite the superintendent back up. You know, as a candidate, I flag foot pursuits as one of the things that I think the consent decree frankly failed to properly address. It put off in 2018 to 2021, even in evaluating whether or not there needed to be a foot pursuit policy. There wasn't a policy until recently. I thought that that was too long because I know that foot pursuits are one of the most dangerous things that police officers engage in. Dangerous for them. They often get separated from their partners. They're running around dark alleys not knowing what's behind every corner. Dangerous for the person that they're pursuing. We've had way too many cases where an individual gets shot in the back by an officer who's hyped up and chasing them, but also dangerous for members of the public who are also at risk when a foot pursuit happening. So for safety of all officers, the individual being pursued, and members of the public, we have now put forward a foot pursuit policy that I think makes sense and reflects feedback that the department received. And I got to credit Bob Boyk and his team, who heads up all of our constitutional policing work. They worked very, very hard to make sure that they put together a policy that was constitutional, that passed muster of the monitor and other stakeholders, but importantly, was going to get the job done, recognizing that foot pursuits are a necessary tool of the police department, but doing it in a way that safeguards our officers, the person being pursued, and members of the public. Yeah.
I hope I'm wrong, and I don't like to deal with hypotheticals. What if we're back here in June?
I'm sorry?
What if we're back here in June talking about a summer safety plan and nothing has substantially changed in that time?
Well, we're not going to be talking about a summer safety plan in June. We talked about a summer safety plan today, January 5th. Planning for the summer started last fall and continues. And what we've told the members of the department, and I'll let the superintendent really speak to this, is no time off. We can't take our foot off the gas. We've got to learn from the things that worked last year, and there's a lot of data around that. There have already been planning sessions that took place before the holidays with the districts, frankly, that were most challenged, and that work is ongoing right now. And we believe in metrics, we believe in data, and the superintendent's going to hold people accountable. And if we need to make changes, we need to pivot the strategy. No time like the present to do that. We're not waiting till May or June to say, here's what our summer safety program is. Our summer safety program is all year round, and it starts today.
We normally don't deal in what ifs. There's enough challenges for today. So I would just say this. The dedication and commitment to safety for the people of Chicago starts today. It starts today. It doesn't start in the summer. Of course, we know more challenges in the summer. But I just think that what we can do, we will do, and we will do well. And we likely will have to do in layers of metrics that we've never done. We likely need to cross more thresholds of we never had this many guns. We've never had this many arrests of felons. We never had this many conspiracy cases. We likely will need to break untold records in this department to turn the tide, and we're committed to doing that. We're setting that as the goal every day. So we have the end of the year goal, and we divide it by 365. So what do you have to do today to meet that goal? Today. And if you can't meet it today, are you the leader for this department? Or do we need to change leaders? Because we have to make Chicago safer. We have to. There's no wiggle room for the faint of heart as a leader in the Chicago Police Department. So we're dedicated and committed, and we just don't deal with what ifs. It's today. Today starts the day to make Chicago safer.
John first.
Mayor, can you give us an update on the negotiations that took place today between your negotiating team and the Chicago Teachers Union?
Well, let me say this. We've been at the table every week for weeks with the Chicago Teachers Union. And our team put together a proposal on how to address various concerns that have been raised by the CTU. We're waiting to hear from them about that, and we can get you the specifics of that. But look, first and foremost, we are committed to the safety of our children. That goes without saying. We've demonstrated, I think, over these very difficult years and months of trying to educate our children in the midst of a pandemic, a couple of things. Well, first, $100 million plus in mitigations that were put into the schools, and we continue to do that. That's everything from ventilation to HEPA filters in classrooms, partitions, masks, safety protocols. Each school has a safety committee made up of all the relevant stakeholders, including teachers. We expect those safety committees to do their job and raise their hand if they're seeing specific issues. We're going to continue to work in good faith to try to get a deal done, and we've come to the table every single day with that commitment in mind. But look, fundamentally, what we also know from our experience over the last 20 months is this: the best place, the safest place for our children to be is in a classroom every day. We should remind members of the media in particular, because we're not seeing this in the reporting on this latest conflict. What happened when we went to all remote learning, as the CTU leadership is challenging us to do? What we saw is 100,000 children, particularly among black and brown children, that were disconnected from the system and learning. We saw a threefold increase in the number of failure rates among elementary school children. Not only that, we heard from parents how disruptive that remote learning was to their lifestyles. Many of our parents in CPS can't afford to homeschool and not go to work. These are hardworking families, many of them single-parent households that have to go to work in order to keep the lights on and keep themselves in homes. And we know that remote learning was extraordinarily disruptive to them. There was a letter to the editor in the Sun Times today from a parent who talked about the fact that many parents lost their jobs when we went to remote learning because they had to stay home but couldn't afford to lose a job, but lost a job anyway. We also know the social emotional trauma that our young people face was significant because they were disconnected from their social network, from the thing that keeps them healthy mentally and emotionally. I know that firsthand as a mother of a now 13-year-old. The worst thing that we can do is shut the entire system down. What we ought to be focused on is working collaboratively, working together. And what I would love to see the CTU leadership do is not try to force an illegal work stoppage. What I'd love to see them do is work hand in glove with us to get our kids and their families vaccinated. And the thing that's different now than about previous times where we've seen surges is we have the vaccine. And what we know is because we have the vaccine, that schools across the city are experiencing this latest surge in Omicron differently, meaning it's not one size fits all. We're in a world where there are some schools where a significant portion of the student population is vaccinated. We know overall that I believe 92% of teachers and staff are vaccinated. That's a very different world. So that allows us, as CEO Martinez has said, to act more tactically, strategically, and target the resources where they are needed and to support those schools that are having challenges. We know that this is disrupted. There's massive community spread of the Omicron variant. But where it's affecting people most, and the data is laser focused on this, is the people who are unvaccinated. So where we should unify is around getting the message out to parents that they must get their children vaccinated. When we closed CPS for a day, when vaccinations became available for 5 to 11-year-olds, CEO Martinez said this, and I believe it's true. It's an investment not just for this day, not for this moment, but for the entire school year. That's what we ought to be focused on. The thing that brings us together, because in the school setting, our common enemy is the virus. And our solution is the vaccine, the vaccine, the vaccine. Yep. For the reasons that I said. If we pause, what do we say to those parents who can't afford to hire somebody to come in and watch their kids, who can't ship their kids off to some other place? What do we say to those students who are already struggling? You know, I want to emphasize this point. 100,000 kids that we lost contact with through remote learning. We're just getting that back. We're about 85% recovered, either kids that graduated or we've reconnected with them. Why on earth, when we don't need to pause, would we pause and risk falling back into the same old trap? Achievement gaps are real, and they are affecting kids of color at an exponential rate. So anybody who's talking about, why don't we just pause? This isn't college. This isn't some other business where you've got adults who can fully function without the need of support. We're talking about 5-year-olds. I remember going into classrooms, watching kindergarten teachers and preschool teachers try to teach these little kids how to push pause, how to take themselves off pause, how to function on iPads or other devices. Teachers trying to teach on tiny little screens. We don't need to go back to that moment because we have the vaccine. The thing that we need to do is get people vaccinated. That's where we should focus. Throwing up our hands and acting as if we don't have this body of knowledge, A, that our schools are safe, that we spent $100 million plus to make them safe, that we have the vaccine, that it's affecting different parts of the city differently. We don't need a one-size-fits-all strategy. We need to lean in to the science and the data and not push that to the side and give in to fear-mongering and hysteria. We're leaning in to the science. And my scientist, Dr. Allison Arwady, tells me that the schools are safe. There's no reason to shut down the entire system, particularly given the catastrophic consequences that will flow. 1 week, 2 weeks, it doesn't matter. That's not where we need to be spending our time and energy. We need to be working together and get our kids vaccinated. We need to support those families that are seeing challenges, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're getting them additional testing resources. We're getting them masks. We're doing everything that we can to educate them. But right now, what we need to do is make sure that we have a healthy system and keep it open, because that is what's in the best interest of our children. Study after study has shown that, both of CPS, of the Archdiocese schools, and across the country. Schools are safe. They're not a significant source of spread. We need to focus on what the data and the science tells us, and that's we got to get our kids vaccinated. We cannot afford to make this about politics, about power, about flexing muscle. This has got to be about our kids. And if you're not hearing children, and families come out of the mouths of people who are pontificating about what should happen in this moment, then you know what their truth is. It's about something else. For me, I'm going to be on the sides of our kids and our parents and our families and make sure that we're doing everything we can to support them. And I know, based upon the data, based upon our experience, the best place for our kids to be, because the schools are safe, they have their masks, there's social distancing, there's partitions. The best place for them to be is not left to their own devices, not left out on the street. It's to be in a classroom that we know is safe.
With regard to the 200 new homicide detectives, what's the timeline for them to be out working cases, and how will they be distributed? It's like 40 per area, like spread across all shifts? Like, what are the specifics going to look like?
So 100 should be completing their class here in mid-January, and then we'll promote another round to get to our number. There's a 5-week training for that second group as well, so middle of early March for the second group, so we'll be fully functioning with their training and the promotions done in Q1 is our goal. How they'll be distributed is across where we have, obviously, the most violence. We're focusing on these new promotees to be in violent crime units, prioritizing homicide, but also robbery, aggravated assault units, as well as criminal sexual assault. And areas 1, 2, and 4, as you know, have actually the largest portion of violent crime, so that we'll use that percentage basis to assign these detectives. So I hope that answered all your questions.
Yeah.
Sure.
And then with regard...
Yeah. Yeah.
The,
Yeah.
what...
So we made those changes and had this discussion about what needs to happen to really fill our vacancies over a year ago. And what we concluded was we need a dedicated recruiting team. Never had one here in Chicago Police Department. So we interviewed, selected the best candidates, and we've had a dedicated recruiting team on the ground since last June of 2021. And so that's 7,200 applications we have. That's 6 months of this dedicated recruiting team recruiting. Yes, yes, we had no dedicated recruiting. Part 2 of our strategy is a everyday online ability to test for applicants. We've never had that. So we hired a vendor and built an online portal to test online with the confidentiality and vetting to, without cheating and et cetera, to the test. So that'll be available all year long, whereas that's been available maybe for the last 3 months. So we think we'll have an ability to have applicants test anywhere in the country, really anywhere in the world, if they want to be a Chicago police officer, as well as our dedicated recruiting team going to military bases, job fairs, historically black colleges, universities, recruiting Hispanics in those parts of Illinois and the rest of the country where Hispanics live that might be from Chicago but live somewhere else and want to come back home and want to be a Chicago police officer. So all of that, as well as in-person tests. So as you know, we held in-person tests for the first time the last half of 2021. We didn't hold any in 2020 or the first half of 2021. So we hope to hold multiple in-person tests this year, as well as the online, as well as the dedicated team. So we feel confident we'll get our 14,000 applicants, and then the vetting process, background investigations, and power tests comes into play to vet the best candidate that's representative from a demographic standpoint. We're prioritizing diversity as well with this hiring push to get the best candidate in the door in our academy to fill our vacancies. Yep.
Sorry for jumping the gun. Can I take third page? Maybe I'll step up to you here.
Is it for me or the mayor? Do you know?
I'm sorry, it's for the mayor. I'm sorry.
Okay.
You're calling for this moratorium, and I was listening, reading the list in your talk in Garfield Park of the crimes that you wanted to cover. Do you mean for it to cover people arrested, pretrial defendants who were arrested on gun possession charges? I'm going to say gun possession because that's what it is, not firearm
If they're charged with a violent crime, absolutely I do. You know, there was something that happened last year where I believe the state's attorney said, you know, the Chicago Police Department's wasting its time arresting mere gun possession. Well, mere gun possession means we haven't caught them. Illegal gun possession is illegal gun possession. That is a precursor to other crimes. Every single person that Chief Dinahan and his team are investigating for violent crime has multiple arrests and or convictions for gun possession that leads to something else. So it's like the gateway. The illegal gun possession is not simply grandpa with his firearm they brought home from the war. These are young men who shouldn't be possessing illegal firearms, and illegal gun possession is the thing that is driving violence in our city. Over 90% of our homicides are related to illegal gun possession that's being used in a way that harms. So yes, I do. They are included on that list.
You probably saw Arnie Duncan's piece the other day. He referred to this policing strategy in the short term. He referred to it as insanity, trying to sink him over.
As what? I'm sorry, I didn't read. I didn't read. Insanity. Easy for him to say from the comfort of his home. What I know is,
Tell you what he's calling for, though.
yeah.
He's calling for hundreds of millions of dollars. He's calling for allowing the police department to shrink by attrition, and then hundreds of millions of dollars, not tens of millions, hundreds of millions invested into street outreach and wraparound services for the people that are most at risk for either committing violence or being the victim of violence.
So in other words, defunding the police. Well, when you say allowing the police department to shrink, when you mean that we're going to stop hiring personnel and we're going to shrink the department through attrition, that's defunding. They may be trying to dress it up in some other name, but that's defunding. I categorically reject defunding the police. And I don't know any person who actually knows anything about policing and crime in our city that would support defunding the police. So if that's where he's at, I'm on the other side of him. Look, we have exponentially increased the amount of money for street outreach in every single budget that we pass. We've done that again this year. But I would say to Arnie Duncan, who's sitting on Elaine Jobs money, put your money where your mouth is. Why don't you put more money into street outreach? We're doing our part. He needs to do his part. But defunding the police, disgracing the men and women in this department by letting it shrink by attrition in the middle of a violent crime surge, that's what I would call insanity. It's a stupid idea. I don't support it. And I will never, ever, as long as I am mayor, support defunding the police department.
Thanks a lot, Mayor.
Thank you.